Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Last session of the day, last session of the conference. I'm sure you're quite tired, worn out, but a good conference so far? Good. Excellent. All right, we'll try to end it with a bang. So my name is Tim Corey. This is what we're talking about, VS Code for C# developers. I've got a little bit of PowerPoint to go through just to kind of set us a baseline for why. All right, and then we're going to dive into the actual code. Most of this session is going to be code. Think about your questions. We'll answer them at the end. I'll try and save some time for you. We probably won't get out here early, but I'll try and at least get you out of here on time. I know that you want to get to the next thing and keep moving. So, why? Why use VS Code? Visual Studio. The full Visual Studio is the best tool, at least free, for working with C#. Yes, there are other tools like Writer, but why do we use VS Code? It seems like a step down. It seems like it's a smaller tool. So why use VS Code? Let's start with the first one. It's very, very fast. If you've ever opened up Visual Studio and gone and gotten coffee, then come back and then hope that your stuff was loaded by that point, VS Code is very, very fast. Why is this important? Well, for one, if we have a code base where we just want to make a small change, okay? We just did, we spotted a bug, we make a small change, maybe you're not even on your laptop or your PC, you can just download, go to Git, do a Git clone, download the code, open up the VS Code, make the change, publish back to Git, and you're good to go. So it's very, very fast. In fact, I did a little experiment a little bit ago. I'm going to publish the video at some point soon where I went out and bought a Raspberry Pi and a keyboard form. So it's $100 at the time, Raspberry Pi, and I said, what can we do with this? And so I put VS Code on there, I put the .NET SDK on there, and I started building web apps. And it worked great. So in a little keyboard factor, $100 plus your monitor, I was up and running with VS Code. So VS Code is a great platform for just getting stuff quick. If you have an older PC, if you have something that's dying, but you can still get VS Code running, you can still do C# development. Number two, cross-platform. It's on Windows, it's on Mac, it's on Linux, it's in the cloud. You can put VS Code practically everywhere. Like I said, a Raspberry Pi can run VS Code. And so when you're working with your C#, again, you might not always have your machine, you might not always be on a machine where it's your full development suite. And so being able to work cross-platform is a great luxury. Also, that cross-platform experience is basically the same across the entire suite of operating systems. This is one that people miss, and this is why I really encourage everybody, even if you have a great machine, even if you're working at your desk, even if you have full Visual Studio, I encourage you to drop down into VS Code once in a while. It's going to open your eyes. Because when you start working with your C# code, when you start building your C# code, you're going to start saying, wait, what? How do I do that again? For example, one of the things I love about VS Code is you say file, just new file, and it just says, what's the name? That's it. I mean, you don't have this whole dialogue and dialing through different things. You just say, hey, I want a new file. And so I say, personmodel.cs. The downside there is you're presented the blank file. Do you know what goes in there? Do you know how to put a namespace in, how to structure your class properly? Do you know how to scaffold out the basics of that file? Well, it's going to push those C# skills, sometimes pushing the basics that you think you just know, and kind of pushing you to know them better. And so that's why I encourage you to use it at least once in a while. And finally, it prepares you for your CI/CD process. If you've ever used GitHub Actions, or you built a Docker container, or other processes where you're putting your C# into your this build process where you have to script out what happens, you don't want that to be the first time you've ever seen the .NET command line. Because when you build out a GitHub action and you start typing out those command lines, if you don't know what's going on, you put it in and you push it up and you run it and you wait and you wait and you wait and it fails. And then you just go, oh, I missed a space here, a comma here, something else here. And so you make the change, and then you push it up and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait, and then it fails again. And so by having to use VS Code, you've also used the .NET command line, you're more ready to move on to these build processes where it uses the command line in order to build out your application. So that's my 4 reasons for why you should use VS Code. Whatever your reason for using VS Code, let's actually see it in action. Okay, so like I said, I'm not a big PowerPoint guy. We're going to dump the PowerPoint at that point, and let's start with just opening up the terminal. Now the first thing is, on the terminal, is this big enough for everybody? Yes, in the back? Good, okay. So the first thing with the terminal is, if you haven't already, learn this, code space dot. Whatever folder you're in, that opens VS Code in that folder. Super helpful. We're going to do that quite a bit. We're going to leave the terminal open. I prefer, especially in demos, to use this terminal as opposed to, come on, give me the corner, as opposed to the terminal inside of, oh goodness, inside of the VS Code. Now you can go into VS Code. If you hit your control and the tilde, it pulls up the terminal. You can use that if you want, but again, I prefer, especially in demos, to have what I think is the nicer view terminal. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is you need to make sure that you have the .NET SDK installed on your computer. To do that, you can say .NET, all one word. That command is like the command to know, .NET, then you can do whatever you want. So in this case, --info. And this tells me what's installed. So we have, currently, we're on Windows, it says on Windows 10, but that's just because it's Windows 11. It says that we're on the .NET SDK of 7.0.102, and we have the following runtimes installed, 5, 6, and 7. All right? So that tells you what's installed. If you don't have an SDK installed, you can just Google it, and you'll get to this right here. Just Google .NET SDK, download, and you'll get to this. And with this, it's going to show you the supported versions, and you just download whichever SDK is right for your platform. This will change if you're on Mac or on Linux. There's also the out-of-support versions, so you can even go back if you want to a .NET Core 1.0 and cry. So it's up to you. All right, so with that, the other thing is, if you don't have VS Code, go to visualstudio.com, and right there. Download it for practically any platform. Okay, back to the demo. So we have .NET --info. Let's talk now about how we want to create a new project. Now, what I'm going to do in this demo is create a few projects from scratch. I don't anticipate you'll all do that all the time. I don't anticipate that you use VS Code for everything that you do. But if I walk through all the steps, then whenever you need to do one of the steps, you'll know how to do that, okay? So, let's start with, where do you start? Well, .NET New. .NET New is the place to start to create anything, but if you don't know what to create, .NET New list. All right? And that you have to add 2 dashes for that. Let's actually clear the screen and start it again. So it's --dash list. There we go. And if we maximize this, we have a little better of a view. These are all the templates that are installed on my computer. And yes, you can create any of these using the command line. So we're going to do a few of these today. There's some fun ones hidden in here that you might not think about. So first of all, .NET New get ignore. Now, if you ever create a get-ignore file, you know that there's a lot that has to go into it for Visual Studio, for VS Code, for .NET in general. Or you can just do that. Okay? So we go back to our VS Code, and look, we have a get-ignore file that has hundreds. Yeah, 477 lines of ignore stuff. All right, and if we searched, I actually searched earlier, in here is your VS Code entries. So it has VS Code entries, it has Visual Studio entries. It's designed to work with everything .NET. All right, so with one command line, you create that. All right, So now let's create a .NET new solution, SLN. So we're going to start with, let's start with simple demo. You have to name it. Sorry. -- name. Okay. So .NET new SLN for solution, then I just give it -- name to name my solution. I call it simple demo. And I have to go back over to VS Code. We now have a solution file. Solution file has nothing with it, but at least you have a solution file. So let's actually put something in it. So .NET new console. And again, .NET new and then -- list will give you whatever thing you need, and then you just start running these commands. Name. So I'll call this console UI. All right, so it's created the console for us. Let's shrink this back down and look over here. We have a console application. We're getting a good start. And now we want to associate the CS proj file with a solution file because those don't come associated out of the box. So what we say is .NET SLN and give it the solution name, which is simple demo.sln. We say add console UI / console UI.CS proj. Okay, now I'm using PowerShell. If you're using Bash, there are ways to do the glob pattern in order to say just, hey, give me every CS proj file associated with the solution. Okay, but with PowerShell, you can't do that. All right, so now we have the two associated with each other. Go back over here to our console UI and look at program.cs. All right, we have our normal program.cs, and this pops up. So what this is, it says, hey, you're missing some build assets. Well, this is not from VS Code. It's actually from a C# extension. We hit yes for this. Let's go over to our extensions and look. And right here, this is the one extension you really need to have installed if you're working with C# in VS Code, and that's the C# extension. It does come from Microsoft. It's actually powered by OmniSharp. All right? So with that extension installed, once it sees a valid program.cs, then it's going to say, hey, I want to scaffold out some things. And it's going to put it in the .VSCode folder. The benefit there is that this is only for VS Code. It gets ignored by Git, and it's specific to your machine. It's not going to impact your source code, which means that if you have source code that you usually use in Visual Studio, and you open up in VS Code, you're not going to have an impact negatively on your source code just because you opened it up. This is all separate. But what's in here? Let's take a peek. We have two files. We have tasks.json. We have launch.json. We're going to play more around this in just a minute. But first, let's do this. Let's go over to our C# code. And first, let's just run. So we're going to hit F5. When it builds, it runs, and it's right here where it says hello world. Okay? Not the greatest of experiences, but hey, it actually runs. So let's start creating some code. So if I were to say int I equals 3, and I were to say I plus equal 4, and then CW, snippets do work. So CW is a snippet. So I hit tab. And I can say, so our string interpolation here, the value of I is like so. But I'm not sure this is correct, so I'm going to put a breakpoint here. I hit F5. Let's run this. It hits the breakpoint. I can step over. I can mouse over and see the value. I can come over here in my locals window and look at the value of I. I can set watch values as well, and so on. So it's getting closer to a full Visual Studio experience, but still it's that light experience of VS Code. Now, I'm going to show you a quirk. So if I were to say console.write, what is your name? And then I were to say string name equals console.readline, like so. And then let's just console write line that says hello, and your name. Okay, and I think I've got an extra set of brackets down here. Okay, so a couple things here. First of all, if you can see that, there's squigglies underneath the console read line. The reason for that is because the console read line can technically return a null string, but yet my string is not marked as nullable. This is a newer feature in .NET. If we were to go over to our console or our CSproj file, we can see right here, nullable is enabled, which means it's going to yell at us every time we have a potentially nullable string going into a non-nullable marked string or other variable types. So we can work around this by saying, yeah, we know, could be null. Okay, and we're good. But now let's run this application again. And when we do, it hits the breakpoint, great. Let's take the breakpoint off. Let's run it again, keep running it. It says the value of I is 7, and that's it. All right? So what's happening? Well, there is a, I'm not sure it's a feature, but they kind of mark it as a feature, that if you go over here to your VS Code and look at the launch settings, and you look at right down here where it says console, it says, you mouse over, it says the internal console does not support reading from the console, which is super helpful, okay, because that's, you know, we don't ever do that in consoles. So what you can do, take that out, Control space brings up a list of our IntelliSense, our drop-down list. We get to choose which one we want, and I prefer the external terminal. So external or integrated terminal, either one will work. And now if we hit F5, it's going to launch the external terminal window. We can say, my name is Tim, and it goes away. Why does it go away? Well, that's something that we as C# developers should know about, but console, read line at the end, just to pause things. Okay, my name is still Tim. And it's not printing anything out. They never actually printed it out. Is that right? Yep. Read lines in the wrong place. Okay. It's always fun to do this on stage. All right, my name is now Tom. Hello, Tom. Okay, so that's how we debug, that's how we have read line, that's how we run our applications. So let's make some changes now. Let's go on to add a class library. And again, I'm going to dive back out into my other terminal just for the visual sake of it. But I'm going to keep open this window so you can kind of see it, hopefully. And we're going to say .NET, new, class library, class lib. We're going to give it a name. And this name is going to be helper lib. Okay, we see it pop up right over there. Now we need to add that to the solution. So .NET, SLN, simple demo.sln, add, helper lib, / helperlib.csproj. Okay, we've now added that to the solution. By the way, if you were to say .NET SLN list, you see which projects are actually in your solution. Okay, so let's do the next thing we need to do. Let's go to change the directory to helperlib. And in this directory, now that I'm in the directory, I can work on the particular project that's there instead of having to specify where's the project. Which means I can do things like .NET add package. So you want to add a NuGet package? Let's just pick one. I hope the Wi-Fi works. There you go. So now I've added a NuGet package. Now, again, this is where it starts to push you. You just say, hey, I don't like that syntax. I don't want to do that syntax because that's terribly hard to have that one line. That's all it's doing, so just go ahead and put that in there. copy and paste in another project, whatever you want to do. So again, this is where we want to push ourselves to know our C# projects better and better, because when we do, we know at the fundamental level how things work, then it's very easy to make changes. Like I can get rid of Dapper just by backspacing now. Okay. So let's go back to our project. We're going to change back out. We can say .NET build. Make sure things still build after I made all those changes. Yes, they do. That's great. Now, let's go to the, while we're here, let's change directory into the console UI. And we're going to say .NET run. So if you don't want to use VS Code at all and hit the F5, just say .NET run in the project directory. And there we go. What's my name? It's Tim now. Hello, Tim. We're good to go. Okay? So we have options with this. Now let's clear the screen again, and we're going to change the directory up one. And we're back in the solution directory, and while we're here, let's do this. Let's add our class library to our console project. So, .NET add console UI / console UI.csproj reference, and this is helper lib / helper lib.csproj. Now, what did that do? If we go back over here to our console, look at the csproj file, all it did was do this. So again, you don't have to know the command line for that. You can just type in the item group. Okay. So with that, just to make sure again that it still runs, let's come back over here and just hit F5, make sure that nothing broke. Good. Still working. Okay. So, a couple things in here. Let's go to our class library. Let's get rid of class 1. Let's start over. So we're going to say new file. I love this. So we're just going to say messages.cs. And I have, again, a blank file. So I would say .cs file, but it's up to me what to do with that. So I need to know namespace, helper lib. I'm going to say public class. Let's call this messages, since that's the name of the file we're in. And we'll say public void. It is helping me with typing. That's really good. Say hi. And hello, NDC. Okay? Now, this is my obligatory. We're going to demo. Don't put your data access or user interface in your class library, please. Okay. But now that I have this here, I can come over to my program.cs and I can reference it, right? So I want to reference the messages. So messages, don't have the using directive for that. But I hit Control dot here, and I still get my quick actions refactoring. I can hit Enter to add the using at the very top. So now at the very top, we have using helper lib. And so now I can say messages equals new. I can say messages dot say hi. And with that, if we run this, my name is Tim and hello NDC as well. Okay? So that's how we reference our class library. It's how we access the class library from our other project. That's how we use the quick actions refactoring. We go back over to the messages. We'll also see we have code lens. So if you click, and let me just, go away. It gets too big sometimes. There we go. If you look on top of your methods and on top of your classes, you have how many references there are. This used to be a Visual Studio Enterprise feature in 2019. Now it's in Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition and also in VS Code. So you can see where the reference is. You can even click on the reference, double click on it, and it takes you right to the code. So you can actually navigate through your code that way. Also, just like in Visual Studio, if you hit F12 on, say, messages, it takes you to where that class definition is. So we have a lot of the same features of Visual Studio It's just in a smaller, faster package. Okay? So let's do this. Let's start over. And we're going to close out this entirely. And we'll move on to demo number 2. Because I'm sure that not everybody here just wants to build console applications. So let's do this, .NET, new solution. And we're going to call this name Blazor Demo. And we're going to say .NET new Blazor server. And the name will be Blazor UI. Now this is the full Blazor server template. There is, let's just, .NET, let's clear the screen first. .NET new list. We go here, if we look at the Blazor solutions, or Blazor templates here, we see Blazor server, we also see the Blazor server-empty. That's the new .NET 7 template that has basically nothing in it. Doesn't even have Bootstrap. So it's pretty much just hello world when you run it. It's not great for demos, so we're not going to use it. There's also the Blazor WebAssembly, and now we also have .NET MAUI Blazor. But again, we're just using the first Blazor server. Okay, so now we have that. Let's say .NET SLN, Blazor demo.sln, add Blazor UI / Blazor UI dot CSproj. There we go. Now we have those two. We could say code dot to open up our VS Code. We've scaffolded out a full project. And yes, we want to create those elements there, which is that VS Code file with those two things there. Okay. Now, a couple things here. First of all, if that doesn't fire for whatever reason, first of all, go to your program.cs file and just open it up. And wait a second. That's probably the best way to trigger that. There is a way if you go to the View menu, go to Command Palette, and say .NET generate assets for build and debug. That sometimes works. However, if it doesn't come on automatically, it probably won't work there either. Restart VS Code or look at your code, make sure you don't have a malformed project. Okay? So with this, let's do this. Let's just go ahead and hit F5. See what happens. It's always good to just try it out at the very beginning. There we go. So we have a web project. We go to the counter page, of course. Counter. Click me. It all works. That's Blazor UI. The one thing to note, let's zoom in here. If you notice, localhost 5118, if you're familiar with the web projects in .NET, a 5 prefix, the 5000 series means you got HTTP, not HTTPS, and sure enough, your connection is not secure, which is not ideal, right? So let's fix that. So we'll close out of this, minimize, hit stop. So back over to our launch.json. Launch.json is the place to look for basically everything about launching your application. And in here, we want to add a new section. So I put it right under the pre-launch task. So we're going to say launch settings profile. And we give it a profile name. Now I'm going to get the profile name of HTTPS. But where did I get that name from? So if you go over to properties of your project, again, this is where knowing more about your project and how it actually works is really helpful. This works in Visual Studio as well. So you go to the launch settings.json under properties. And you'll see in here you have profiles. There's IS settings at the top, and then there's profiles. The first one is HTTP. The second one is HTTPS. Now, full Visual Studio says, we know what you really want. You want HTTPS, so that's what we'll default to. But for VS Code, it's not making that assumption for you. Therefore, it's going to grab the first one by default, which is not what you technically want. So, or at least not usually. So instead, I chose this name. Now, that name can be anything you want. That could be Tim's cool web application runner thing. Not a great name, but you could use that name. in which case you have to go over to your launch.json and put that whole long string there. Just use HTTPS. Okay? With that, if we now hit F5 to run our application, and if we look, we're now on the 7000 port series, and we have a secure connection. Okay, so we're using HTTPS as opposed to HTTP, which is more in line with how we actually use our website. Therefore, it's more in line with how we should be testing our site. Now, that's pretty cool, but let's actually close this stuff out, and let's go over to our pages, and let's go to this index page. And we're going to run this first. Wait for it to load. I'm going to shift it over. So let's shift this over to the left or the right third, and we'll grab VSCode. There we go. And now I've noticed that it says hello world. That's not very personal. So let's go ahead and change that to hello NDC. We save that, and nothing happens, okay? Because we don't have hot reload yet. We're going to turn hot reload on. So let's undo that change. We want to make that change live. So let's close this out. Let's close that out and maximize this. How do we get to hot reload? Well, we go back over to our launch.json, and where we have our pre-launch, instead of build, we can say watch. Now, if we run this again, and let's move this over to our 2/3 on the left, and go back over to our index.razor. Now, if I were to say hello NDC and wait for a second without touching anything, we've got hot reload. All right? So we're getting closer to our actual same environment we have in Visual Studio with the same features. We have the code lens and the quick actions refactoring. We have the lookups and everything we need, but we're not quite there yet. Because the eagle eye among you will have noticed that's port 5000 again. Oops. Okay. So this is a bit of a quirk. And I'd love to find someone that tells me there's a better way. So please see me after if it's a better way, because that'd be awesome. However, what I have found is the best way to solve this problem is actually go into your launch settings.json, is to grab this profile right here, cut it out, come down here, paste it back in, change the order. So your first one is HTTPS. Okay? Like I said, a little hacky. But if I run this now, oh, I'm already running it. Let's restart this because that was a major change. Okay. So now if I run this, I see that I am on a secure connection. And if I were to go back over to the Razor page, let's move this back over. Let's get rid of the survey prompt. I hate that thing. Okay, and it's gone. So now we have our hot reload, we have SSL, we have all the fun tools and tricks with VSCode running with Blazor on our site. All right? Okay. So we're not done yet. Because why would we be? All right, let's go ahead and get rid of this session. And we're going to maximize this again. And I want to put in a connection string. Now, we're not going to do data access and all the rest. Y'all can do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my app settings.json. I'm going to say, let's add a connection string. Connection strings. I'm going to say default. I'm going to say this is from app settings.json, okay? Not the place you should be putting your connection string. App settings.json, not the place, at least not locally. So if I were to want to access this, let's go to the a different page just to not mess things up. Let's go to the counter page, and right below the counter, we're going to ask for the connection string. So we're going to say inject. And we're going to say I configuration config. And then down here, We're going to say H2, not HW, H2, how about that? And we're going to say at config dot get connection string and ask for default. Okay? So if we were to run our application again, let's go to the counter page, and now this is from app-settings.json. Hopefully I've not blown anybody's mind quite yet, okay? But we have the connection string from our app-settings.json. But again, that's not the right place to put it when you're local. What you want to do instead is you want to get it from secrets.json. Now, if you're in Visual Studio, you right-click on your project and say Manage User Secrets. But we don't have that in VS Code. Well, kind of. I'll show you that in a minute. But there is a way to do this manually. And the way to do that manually is you go back over here to, let's open up our CS proj file first so we can see it. So let's close all and go over to our CS proj file. There we go. There's our basic CS proj file. I'll open this up and then kind of move it down below so you can see what happens. We're going to clear the screen. We're going to say .NET user-secrets init. And it just doesn't find it. Oh, you know why? I know why. We need to change the directory. All right, let's try it again. So .NET user-secrets init. And the only thing it actually does is it puts this user secrets in our CS proj file, and it puts a GUID there. That GUID starts with 17E. If we go over, let's open up a new version of File Explorer. And if we look, it's going to get a little bit small, but I will put it in the notes for later. Percent app data, percent slash Microsoft slash user secrets. Okay? These are all my user secrets. Don't tell. But you'll not see in here yet a folder that is, what is it, 17E? You'll not see a folder that starts with 17E yet. Now, if you're not familiar, user secrets are not stored with your project. And the reason why is because that way you can put things like your local connection strings in there without it going into source control and bothering the rest of your team. So I want to put my connection string in here. And the way to do that is to go back to our command line. We can move this up now. And we can say .NET user-secrets set. We're going to say connection strings :default. And then this is from user secrets. Like so. So you put your key and then your value. The key is separated by colons if you have a nesting thing. So we're already nested one level in, so we use one semicolon, or one full colon. Okay. Done. Successfully saved. Now go back over here. We're going to see that we now have a folder called 17E. If we drag this secrets.json in here, we'll see connection strings :default. This is for our user secrets. Now, let's hit F5 first, just to see it run. But we're going to talk more about that file. Okay, so counter, this is from user secrets. So we've overridden our app-settings.json with user secrets, but it's a little funky. So let's get rid of this. This works, but it's collapsed. And the way that the .NET command line talks about this in the documentation is it's a feature, not a bug. I personally don't prefer to see that way, but you could go in there and manually change it, or you can right-click on your project and say Manage User Secrets and open it up. You see how I did that? It's actually not built into the C# extension. If we go back to extensions and look, there's another extension from Adrian. I'm not going to pronounce his last name, but Adrian has the .NET Core user secrets. All it does is when you right-click on it, your CS proj file. If there's not already a secrets associated with your project, it's going to create one, and that's going to take you to that file. That's all it's going to do. Okay? So it's a simple little extension. It's an awesome job. All right, so again, if I come back to my project here, and if I got rid of this, again, remember 17E, got rid of it, and then I were to right-click on my CS proj file and say Manage User Secrets, it says, hey, I can't find a user secret for your project. You want to initialize one? Yes. And initialize one, but it's empty. Okay, and it's 4F7 now. It creates a new one. So it doesn't actually reuse one because it's not actually remembering what your project was. It just creates a random GUID and says, hey, there's your secrets. So you can restart if you want. You can also change that random GUID to something else if you wanted to. Why bother? Okay, so in here, connection strings. Oops. Let's stick with the JSON format. Default. This is my new secret. Okay? And if we were to run this, again, just to verify that it's pulling from the new secret, this is my new secret. Okay? So that's user secrets inside of your VS Code. Okay. We're not done yet. Let's keep going. So let's actually close out of Visual Studio. That's good enough for now. And let's try to make my life a little miserable. So let's go to demo 3. We're going to say open terminal. And for demo 3, we're going to say .NET, new solution, name, form demo app. You thought I was going to avoid this, didn't you? Okay, it's not a valid, yes, because I didn't say name. I get talking and typing at the same time, and it doesn't really work. Brain disconnects. Okay, so we have my .NET new solution with the name of form demo app. So .NET new WPF -- name WPF demo. We're going to say .NET SLN form demo app.sln add WPF demo / WPF demo.csproj. Okay, so you've associated the two of them. But why do we stop there? Because that just seems too simple of a demo. So .NET new WinForms. We're going to say the name is spelled right. The name is going to be WinForms demo. So same solution. Yep. Spelling, huh? Thank you. There we go. Okay, so .NET SLN form demo app.sln add WinForms demo / WinForms demo.csproj. Okay. And now let's just open up in code. So we have the WPF demo and we have a WinForms demo, which means we have two different user interfaces in one VS Code. And it says, hey, we're missing some build assets. You want to build it? Sure I do. Yeah, which one? Can I start one at a time, genius? Let's start with WinForm because it was the first. So we now can, if we hit F5, launch WinForms. I mean, I know it's an exciting demo, but there you go. We're actually running WinForms. Now, a couple of caveats here. First of all, that's not cross-platform. So if you're on Mac or you're on Linux, you can build it. Well, actually, I'm sorry. You can open it up and you can make changes to it. You just can't run it. Okay? But if you're on Windows and if you're just bored and want to have something fun to do, go ahead and open up your WinForm application. Now, with that being said, let's go back here. What if I decide, hey, I don't want to have WinForms launched, I want to have WPF launched, or the option to launch either one. That's more in line with what you might do in a real world scenario. So you go to launch.json, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to where it says name, where it says .NET Core Launch Console. This name, if you go back over here to run and debug, you'll see .NET Core Launch Console. So we can change this to be something else. Let's do that. Let's call this WinForms. Now, we go to the View menu and say Command Palette, .NET Generate Assets for Build and Debug. It's going to say, you want to replace the existing? I sure do. Hit yes. Now, I'm going to choose the WPF demo, which didn't actually overwrite my WinForms. If you come down here, we now see that .NET Core Launch Console has been created for my WPF. I can just say WPF. So my drop-down now, I can choose to change to WPF. I can launch this application, wait for it to run, and I have a WPF application launching. But I can come back here, I can go back to WinForms, and I can run WinForms. Now, with that, let's do a couple things just to show off, again, that things still work. So you go over to form1.cs, which is our form, Windows form. We can say var I equals 3, and we can put our breakpoint in here to make sure things are going to work. And then we can hit, well, let's go over to our run and debug and make sure it's WinForms we're launching. And if we do, doesn't hit the breakpoint. Interesting, it should. We'll get there. So the other thing we can do is we go over to our WPF project, we can make some changes to our main window.xaml. The key here is there's not a lot of help. So you need to know about stack panel. Notice there's no real IntelliSense for me. And it's not really helping with the closing tags either. And if I want to say text block and say hello NDC, it's not really helping you there either. So it's not a great tool for WPF editing. It's not a great tool for WinForm editing. WinForm is even a worse scenario because now you're going to the Form 1 designer where it says, hey, don't actually change stuff in here because we do this stuff. Only the we is now you. So good luck. Go ahead and writing your WinForms in your C#. I've done it. It's messy. Don't prefer that. So it still does work, and if we launch this just to see that the WPF has changed, it does work, but there you go. Super tiny, but it does say hello NDC. We'll zoom in there just to prove that, yes, it does work. Okay? So with that, we've got the opportunity to bounce back and forth between more than one startup project. We have the ability to rename our startup projects. We have the ability to debug. We have the ability to make changes to even projects that aren't necessarily full-featured, full support in VS Code, like WinForms or WPF. The story gets a little bit more messy with Maui, so I haven't created a Maui demo for you yet, because that's kind of like a more in flames kind of thing than it is actually a working project. But you can do a lot with VS Code. So let's do this. We're going to pop over here and just do a quick recap, and then we're going to have some time for questions. So, recap, extensions. First of all, C# by Microsoft, which is the OmniSharp variant of C#. So get that extension. Also get the .NET Core User Secrets. That's a great extension by Adrian. It's really helpful for your day-to-day. That's all I really use for my C# development. Now, .NET commands. .NET new list, that's one that helps me tremendously when I forget what's the command for an empty class library or class library for Eraser pages or something like that. .NET solution, for the solution, add the project. .NET run, .NET watch. So I didn't do it, but on the command line. If you decide, hey, I want to bypass VS Code entirely and just watch this on the command line, you just run .NET watch in the directory where your project is, and it will run and watch it for you. .NET Publish. So when you're ready to publish your application, running .NET Publish will package it up for you. Again, it's very, very helpful to know how to do that command, how to run it locally and test it, because of the fact that that's what's going to be in your CI/CD pipeline for pushing your application out to wherever it gets deployed. And then .NET user secrets. Again, knowing how to use those user secrets appropriately. All right, VS Code, the launch.json tweaks. We only play with launch.json. That's the place where you're going to spend most of your time making tweaks. The first one, if you're working with a console application, you actually want a console, change it to either integrated terminal, which is the terminal inside of VS Code, but separate from the build window, which means you can get the console read lines, or use external terminal in order to launch a separate window. Launch settings profile, this we're going to add to your launch.json, and this is what's going to launch on that HTTPS or whatever flavor you decide to launch on. And then finally, the pre-launch tasks. You can either have it build, if you want to build your application and just have it run without hot reload, or if you wanted to have hot reload, you change it to watch. Okay? So what questions do you have? The far back, you might need a shout, or you can come up here, whichever. What's the, I'm sorry, what? The unit testing experience, good question. So if you have unit tests, which I didn't put in this demo, but if you have unit tests, then all you need to do is go to the command line and say .NET test, I believe it is, and it will run those in the command line. So there isn't a GUI in VS Code that I know of, but you'll see it in the command line and see your tests, which ones pass, which ones fail, and so forth. Good question. Don't have a specific answer for you. I can look it up for you. Good question. So the question is, hey, is there an advantage to having a solution file when we're just using VS Code and running CS Proj? There's a few things that require a solution file, and the biggest one is if you want to then work with anything else, VS for Mac, VS for full Visual Studio, or Rider or anything else. It's just easier if you have that solution file, so it's that cross tool access. And that's something too is everything we did today, with the exception of flipping the HTTP and the HTTPS, everything we did was really outside of our code when it came to configuring VS Code, which means that we can then use Visual Studio and not have a disruption. So that's why it's nice to have a solution, because then you're not causing a disruption for anybody else. When they go to open it, there's not a good way in Visual Studio yet to just open a project without it already creating a solution for you. So, good question. Other questions? So the question is, there's tons of plugins out there, how you choose which ones to use. Here's my philosophy on tooling and in plugins, and it's served me pretty well. Start with nothing and just do your job. And then when you can't go any further, when you say, hey, I'm continually hitting this wall, then go look for a plugin to help you. Now, obviously, in this case, we're going to start off with a C# plugin. And I would say the user secrets too, because that's a pretty easy one. But if you start adding plugins just to add plugins, then you might not actually make your life better, you might make it worse. So start off with find your pain points first, and then go find the solution for that pain point if there is one. There's not a ton of plugins for C# specifically when it comes to VS Code, but I'm not sure there's a whole lot that is needed. Okay? Are there security concerns with the plugins? Anything you run on your computer that's going to touch your source code, you need to think through. But by and large, they're open source, and you can look at them and see what's going on. Okay? Other questions? All right. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for sticking out to the end of the session. Have a great trip home, and thanks for being at NDC.